Hi, I'm Erika. When I was 14, my family left me at St. Mary's Medical Center with a handwritten note that said, "We can't afford her anymore." 6 years later, they watched my private jet land at the courthouse where they were filing for bankruptcy. This story isn't about money. It's about what happens when abandonment becomes the foundation for everything you build. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The thing about being abandoned is that it doesn't happen all at once. It's a slow erosion, like water wearing away stone, until one day you realize you're standing on nothing at all. My family's abandonment began long before that Tuesday in March, when they walked out of St. Mary's Medical Center and never came back. I grew up in Riverside Heights, a neighborhood in Phoenix, where the houses all looked the same and everyone pretended their problems were smaller than they actually were. Our house at 2847 Maple Drive had beige stucco walls and a red tile roof, with a small front yard that my mother Linda constantly complained about because it never looked as green as the neighbors. My father Robert worked construction when the economy was good, which wasn't often enough. My older brother Jake was 17 and already talking about joining the military to escape. My younger sister Sophia was 12 and still believed our parents when they said everything would work out fine. I was the middle child, the one who noticed too much and said too little. I kept track of things in my head like other kids collected baseball cards. The number of days Dad went without work. The way Mom's smile got tighter when bills arrived in the mail. How Jake started staying out later and later, sometimes not coming home until morning. The way Sophia would ask me questions about why people were always whispering when they thought she couldn't hear. Money was always tight, but it got worse when Dad hurt his back in a fall at a construction site. The workers' compensation barely covered our rent, and Mom's part-time job at the grocery store couldn't stretch to cover everything else. I watched my parents' conversations become hushed arguments, saw the way they looked at Jake, Sophia, and me like we were expensive problems they couldn't solve. The medical issues started small. I'd always been the kid who got sick more often than my siblings, catching every cold that went around school, dealing with headaches that made it hard to concentrate in class. Mom would give me generic aspirin and tell me to tough it out. When the headaches got worse, severe enough that I'd throw up and have to lie in a dark room for hours, she took me to the free clinic downtown, where a tired doctor said it was probably stress and growing pains. But the symptoms kept getting worse. The headaches became migraines that lasted for days. I started having dizzy spells where the world would tilt sideways without warning. Sometimes my vision would blur so badly I couldn't read the board at school. I'd come home and find Mom counting pills into weekly organizers, her face tight with concentration and worry that had nothing to do with my health. School became increasingly difficult. Lincoln High School was overcrowded and understaffed, the kind of place where you could disappear if you weren't careful about staying visible. My grades, which had always been decent, started slipping as the headaches made it impossible to focus during tests. My English teacher, Ms. Patricia Williams, noticed when I fell asleep at my desk during a discussion of To Kill a Mockingbird. "Erika, can you stay after class?" she asked one Friday afternoon. Ms. Williams was in her 40s, with graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She was the kind of teacher who actually remembered your name and asked about your family. I approached her desk reluctantly, knowing she was going to ask questions I didn't have good answers for. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Are you feeling all right? You seem tired lately, and your last essay was well below your usual standard. "I'm fine," I said automatically, the response my family had trained into me. We didn't air our problems to outsiders. We didn't admit when things were falling apart. Ms. Williams studied my face with the careful attention of someone who'd seen too many kids trying to hide too much. "Erika, if there's something going on at home, or if you need help with anything, you know you can talk to me, right?" I nodded, but we both knew I wouldn't take her up on the offer. At 14, I still believed that family problems were supposed to stay in the family, that asking for help was a sign of weakness rather than wisdom. The night everything changed started like any other. Dad was in his recliner watching television, a heating pad pressed against his lower back. Mom was at the kitchen table with bills spread out like tarot cards, trying to make numbers add up to something sustainable. Jake was out somewhere, probably avoiding the tension that seemed to fill our house like smoke. Sophia was in her room doing homework with a dedication that felt desperate, like good grades could somehow save us all. I was lying on my bed, trying to read a chapter for history class despite the migraine that felt like someone was driving nails into my skull. The words kept swimming on the page, and the light from my desk lamp felt like razor blades against my eyes. I'd taken 4 aspirin, which was more than the bottle recommended, but the pain was getting worse instead of better. When I stood up to turn off the light, the room spun violently to the left. I reached for my desk to steady myself, but my hand missed and I crashed to the floor, taking my lamp and some books with me. The sound brought Mom running. "Erika? What happened?" She found me on the floor, trying to sit up despite the fact that the room was still tilting like a carnival ride. "Dizzy," I managed to say, though speaking made the pain in my head spike higher. "Really dizzy." Mom helped me back onto my bed, her hands cold against my forehead. "You don't have a fever. Did you eat dinner?" I had, though I'd thrown most of it up an hour later. This had become a pattern over the past few weeks. But I hadn't told anyone because I knew we couldn't afford to worry about another medical problem. "I think I need to go to the doctor," I said, the words feeling heavy and expensive as they left my mouth. Mom's face tightened. "Honey, we just can't right now. The insurance deductible is too high, and with your dad not working." She trailed off, but I could fill in the blanks. We were broke, and I was a luxury we couldn't afford. But when I tried to stand up again to go to the bathroom, I collapsed immediately. This time, I didn't remember hitting the floor. Mom told me later that I'd been unconscious for almost a minute, my body jerking in what she thought might be a seizure. That's when she called 911. The ambulance ride to St. Mary's Medical Center was my first time in any kind of emergency vehicle. The paramedic, a young woman with gentle hands and a calm voice, kept asking me questions about my symptoms while she checked my blood pressure and shined a light in my eyes. I tried to answer honestly, but the migraine made it hard to think clearly. "How long have you been having headaches like this?" she asked. "A few months," I admitted. "But they're getting worse." "And the dizzy spells?" "About 3 weeks." She exchanged a look with her partner that I didn't understand at the time, but would later recognize as concern that went beyond routine medical attention. At the hospital, things moved quickly. Dr. Sarah Chen, a woman in her 30s with efficient movements and kind eyes, ordered a series of tests that I'd never heard of. Blood work, CT scans, something called an MRI that required me to lie perfectly still in a machine that sounded like a construction site. My parents waited in the emergency room, Dad shifting uncomfortably in a plastic chair while Mom filled out forms with increasingly worried expressions. I could see them through the door of my examination room, heads bent together in quiet conversation that looked more like negotiation than discussion. The tests took hours. By the time Dr. Chen came back with results, it was well past midnight and I was exhausted despite the fact that I'd been lying down most of the evening. Sophia had been sent to stay with our neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, and Jake still wasn't home. "Erika," Dr. Chen said, pulling a chair close to my hospital bed. "We found something on your scans that we need to talk about." My parents moved closer, Mom reaching for my hand while Dad stood at the foot of the bed with his arms crossed. "You have what's called a brain tumor," Dr. Chen continued, her voice gentle but direct. "It's small, and it's in a location where we can remove it surgically, but it's going to require immediate treatment." The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire. Brain tumor. Surgery. I was 14 years old, and I had cancer. "What does that mean exactly?" Dad asked, his voice careful and controlled in a way that told me he was already calculating costs. Dr. Chen explained the procedure, the recovery time, the follow-up treatments that would be necessary. She talked about success rates and surgical techniques, about the excellent outcomes they typically saw with tumors like mine when caught early enough. But I wasn't really listening to the medical details. I was watching my parents' faces, seeing the way Mom's hand tightened on mine while Dad's expression grew more and more distant. "And the cost?" Mom asked quietly. Dr. Chen named a figure that might as well have been the cost of buying the moon. Even with insurance, our portion would be tens of thousands of dollars. Money we didn't have. Money we couldn't possibly get. "We'll need to discuss this as a family," Dad said finally. "Can we have some time?" Dr. Chen nodded, but there was something in her expression that suggested time wasn't exactly on our side. "Of course. But Erika will need to stay overnight for observation, and we should schedule the surgery as soon as possible. These tumors can grow quickly, and delaying treatment could complicate things significantly." After she left, my parents stood on either side of my hospital bed like sentries guarding something valuable. But I was beginning to understand that I wasn't the valuable thing in this equation. I was the problem they couldn't afford to solve. "Mom?" I said quietly. "Am I going to be okay?" She squeezed my hand, but her smile was the kind that didn't reach her eyes. "Of course, sweetheart. We'll figure this out." But I could see in their faces that they already had. The next morning, Mom came back to the hospital with a small overnight bag and a manila envelope. She'd brought me clean clothes, my favorite book, and some snacks from home. The envelope, she said, contained my insurance cards and medical information that the hospital would need. "Where's Dad?" I asked, noting his absence. "He's at home with Sophia. And Jake's got a job interview today." The lies came easily, but I could see the truth underneath them. Dad couldn't face what they were about to do. Jake was probably relieved to have an excuse to be somewhere else. Sophia was 12 and couldn't be expected to understand why her sister was being left behind like an unwanted pet. Mom stayed with me through the morning rounds, holding my hand while Dr. Chen explained the surgical procedure one more time. The tumor was benign, she assured us, which meant it wasn't cancerous, but it was pressing against parts of my brain that controlled balance and vision. Without surgery, I would likely lose sight in my left eye, and the seizures would get worse. "When can we schedule the operation?" Mom asked, and for a moment I thought maybe everything would be okay after all. "We can do it tomorrow morning if you'd like," Dr. Chen replied. "The sooner the better." Mom nodded, but I noticed she didn't actually confirm the appointment. "We'll let you know this afternoon." After Dr. Chen left, Mom sat beside my bed for a long time without speaking. I could see her working up to something, the way she bit her lower lip and kept checking her watch. "Erika," she finally said, her voice softer than usual. "You know how much we love you, right?" I nodded, though something cold was starting to form in my stomach. "And you know that sometimes adults have to make really hard decisions? Decisions that might not make sense to kids but are necessary for the whole family?" The cold feeling was spreading, creeping up from my stomach into my chest. "What kind of decisions?" Mom reached into her purse and pulled out the manila envelope. Instead of insurance cards, she withdrew a folded piece of paper and placed it on the table beside my bed. "The state has programs for kids who need medical care," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Good programs, with foster families who are experienced with medical situations. They can give you the surgery you need, and the follow-up care, and—" Mom. The word came out sharper than I intended. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that sometimes loving someone means letting them go where they can get the help they need." Her voice was shaking now, and tears were starting to fall down her cheeks. The hospital social worker explained everything. "They'll take good care of you, Erika. Better care than we can give you right now." I stared at the folded paper, understanding without looking that it was some kind of legal document. Paperwork that would make me a ward of the state. A foster kid. An abandoned child. "You're leaving me here." It wasn't a question. Mom was crying openly now, but she nodded. "Just until we can get back on our feet financially. Just until Dad's back to work and we can afford to take care of you properly." "What about Jake and Sophia?" "They're healthy. They don't need expensive medical care." The brutal honesty of it hit me like a physical blow. They were keeping the children who weren't expensive and getting rid of the one who was. "Mom, please." I was begging now, something I'd never done before. "Please don't leave me here. I'll be okay without the surgery. I'll live with the headaches. I won't complain anymore. She was shaking her head before I finished speaking. The doctor says you could die without treatment. Or go blind. We can't risk that, and we can't pay for it. Then get a loan. Sell the house. There has to be another way. There isn't, Erika. Believe me, we've looked at every option. She stood up, smoothing her clothes in a gesture I recognized as her way of preparing to leave difficult situations. The social worker will be here soon to explain everything. The foster family they've found specializes in medical cases. You'll have the surgery and you'll recover. And then maybe what? Maybe when things are better, we can work something out. But we both knew that was a lie. Once I became someone else's responsibility, once I was no longer their problem to solve, my parents would move on with their lives. Jake would graduate and join the military. Sophia would finish middle school and high school. They would figure out how to make their finances work for a family of 4 instead of 5. And I would become a story they told people, a tragedy that had happened to them rather than a choice they had made. I need you to understand, Mom said, leaning down to kiss my forehead one last time. This doesn't mean we don't love you. This means we love you enough to make sure you get the help you need. After she left, I lay in the hospital bed, staring at the ceiling tiles and listening to the sounds of the corridor outside my room. Nurses chatting about their weekend plans, doctors being paged over the intercom, families visiting patients who weren't being abandoned. The social worker arrived 2 hours later. Her name was Ms. Janet Rodriguez, and she was a kind woman in her 50s who spoke to me like I was capable of understanding adult concepts, rather than a child who needed to be protected from reality. I know this is scary, she said, sitting in the chair Mom had vacated. And I know it probably feels like your family is giving up on you. But what they're doing, it's actually a form of love, even if it doesn't feel that way right now. Is it permanent? I asked, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. Ms. Rodriguez considered the question carefully. The legal paperwork makes you a temporary ward of the state, which means your parents could petition to regain custody once their financial situation improves. But realistically, most families who surrender children for medical reasons don't reunite. The medical costs, even after treatment, tend to be ongoing, and the legal process for regaining custody is complicated. So I'm on my own. No, she said firmly. You're going to live with the Rodriguez family. David and Maria Rodriguez have been fostering children with medical needs for over 10 years. They're experienced, they're kind, and they're fully committed to making sure you get the treatment you need and the support you deserve. Are they related to you? Ms. Rodriguez smiled slightly. No relation, just a coincidence of names, though I will be your caseworker, so you'll be seeing me regularly to make sure everything is going well. The next few hours passed in a blur of paperwork and phone calls. A nurse came to explain that my surgery had been rescheduled for the following week, after I'd had time to settle into my new living situation. Another social worker arrived to collect the personal items Mom had brought, ensuring that I'd have familiar things in my new home. David and Maria Rodriguez arrived just before dinner. They were both in their 40s, with gentle faces and calm voices. David worked as a mechanic, Maria as a part-time nurse at a pediatric clinic. They'd fostered over 30 children in the past decade, 12 of whom had required major medical interventions. We know this is overwhelming, Maria said, sitting beside my bed with the easy familiarity of someone who'd had this conversation many times before. And we're not going to pretend this isn't scary or that it's going to be easy. But we want you to know that you're not alone anymore. What happens after the surgery? I asked. You recover, David said simply. You go to school, you make friends, you live your life. We help with homework and drive you to follow-up appointments and argue with you about chores, just like any other parents. But you're not my parents. No, Maria agreed. We're not, but we're the people who are going to take care of you now, and we take that responsibility seriously. They stayed for another hour, explaining what their house was like, what school I'd attend, what the next few weeks would look like. They answered my questions honestly and didn't make promises they couldn't keep. When they left, they assured me they'd be back first thing in the morning to take me home. Home. The word felt strange and empty, like a jacket that belonged to someone else. That night, alone in my hospital room, I wrote my first letter to my family. Not because I thought they would read it, but because I needed to say the things I hadn't been able to say when Mom was sitting beside my bed crying. "Dear Mom, Dad, Jake, and Sophia," I wrote on a piece of paper from my notebook. "I understand why you had to leave me here. I know money is tight and medical bills are expensive. I know you think this is what's best for me. But I want you to know that I'm going to be okay. I'm going to have the surgery and get better, and I'm going to live a good life. And someday, when I'm successful and happy, I hope you'll remember that I was worth fighting for, even when it seemed impossible." I folded the letter and put it in my backpack, not sure what I would do with it, but knowing I needed to keep it. It was the beginning of something, though I didn't understand what yet. The next morning, I was discharged from St. Mary's Medical Center into the custody of David and Maria Rodriguez. I walked out of the hospital carrying a small bag of belongings and a manila folder full of medical records, leaving behind the only family I'd ever known. As we drove through Phoenix toward my new life, I pressed my face against the car window and watched the familiar streets of Riverside Heights disappear behind us. Somewhere in that neighborhood, my parents were probably sitting around the kitchen table, figuring out how to restructure their lives around 4 people, instead of 5. Jake was probably relieved that he no longer had to worry about his sick little sister. Sophia was probably confused and sad, but young enough to adapt to my absence. And I was heading into the unknown, carrying nothing but a brain tumor that needed surgery and a determination that was just beginning to form. I didn't know then that this moment would become the foundation for everything I would build. I didn't know that abandonment could be transformed into fuel, that rejection could become motivation, that being left behind could be the first step toward moving forward. I was 14 years old, and my family had given up on me. But I was about to discover that sometimes, when everyone else stops believing in you, that's when you start believing in yourself. The Rodriguez house was a single-story ranch-style home in West Side, a working-class neighborhood where the yards were small but well-maintained, and the houses showed signs of care despite their age. Their home had been modified over the years to accommodate children with various medical needs. Ramps instead of steps, wider doorways, a bathroom with grab bars, and a shower seat. "This was originally our daughter's room," Maria said, showing me to a bedroom painted pale yellow with white furniture and windows that faced the backyard. "She's grown now, married with kids of her own, but she said to tell you that you're welcome to redecorate however you'd like." The room was simple but comfortable, with a twin bed covered in a quilt that looked handmade, a desk under the window, and shelves lined with books. On the nightstand was a small framed photo of a family I didn't recognize, but Maria noticed me looking at it. "That's the Chen family," she explained. "They were our first foster placement 15 years ago. Tommy needed heart surgery, and his single mother couldn't afford it. He lived with us for 8 months, had the surgery, recovered completely, and now he's a sophomore at Arizona State University studying engineering." "Do you keep in touch with all the kids who've lived here?" "Most of them," David said from the doorway. "We've got pictures and letters from kids all over the country. Once you're part of this family, you stay part of this family, even if you move on to other places." That afternoon, they took me to meet Dr. Chen at the hospital to finalize the surgical schedule. The tumor removal was planned for Friday, which gave me 3 days to settle in and prepare mentally for the procedure. "Are you nervous?" Dr. Chen asked as she reviewed my latest scans. "Terrified," I admitted, surprising myself with the honesty. "That's completely normal. But I want you to know that this is a routine surgery for me. I've performed this exact procedure over 100 times, and the success rate is excellent. You're going to come through this just fine." "And after, what's recovery like?" "A few weeks of taking it easy while your brain heals. Some headaches, probably some fatigue. You'll need to avoid strenuous activity for about a month, but then you should be back to normal functioning. The migraines should stop completely, and your vision should return to normal." Normal. The word carried so much weight. I'd been living with symptoms for so long that I'd forgotten what normal felt like. That evening, Maria helped me call Lincoln High School to arrange for temporary homeschooling during my recovery. My English teacher, Ms. Williams, asked to speak to me directly. "Erika," she said, her voice warm with concern, "I heard about what happened. How are you holding up?" "I'm okay," I said, and for the first time in months, it felt true. Different, but okay. "I want you to know that your seat in my classroom will be waiting for you when you're ready to come back. And if you need help catching up on anything, I'm here." "Ms. Williams? Thank you for noticing that something was wrong, even though I couldn't tell you what it was then." "Sometimes noticing is all we can do," she replied. "But I'm glad someone was able to help." After I hung up, I sat at the desk in my new room and started a journal that Maria had given me. "Day 1 in my new life," I wrote at the top of the first page. Below that, I made a list of things I wanted to remember about this moment. The smell of Maria's cooking drifting from the kitchen, the sound of David fixing something in the garage, the way the late afternoon sun fell across my desk, the strange mixture of fear and hope that was building in my chest. At the bottom of the page, I wrote, "They left me, but maybe that's okay. Maybe I needed to be somewhere else to become who I'm supposed to be." I didn't know then how prophetic those words would prove to be. I didn't know that this abandonment would teach me self-reliance, that foster care would show me what real family looked like, that medical trauma would make me stronger rather than weaker. I didn't know that 6 years later, I would own a business successful enough to afford a private jet, or that my biological family would see that jet land at the courthouse where they were filing for bankruptcy. All I knew was that tomorrow I would have surgery to remove a tumor from my brain, and then I would start building a life that belonged entirely to me. The surgery was scheduled for early Friday morning, which meant I had to be at the hospital by 6 a.m. for preoperative preparation. David and Maria both took the day off work to be there, which seemed like a luxury I wasn't used to. In my birth family, medical appointments were solitary affairs, handled with minimal disruption to work schedules and maximum efficiency. But the Rodriguez family approached medical care like a team sport. Maria packed a bag with snacks, books, and comfort items for the long wait. David brought his laptop so he could handle any work emergencies that might arise. They both dressed like they were going somewhere important, which I realized they were. To them, my surgery was the most important thing happening that day. Dr. Chen met us in the preoperative area, her confidence reassuring as she explained once more what would happen during the procedure. The anesthesiologist, a gentleman named Dr. Patel, walked me through the process of going under and waking up. A surgical nurse named Michael Thompson, who had kind eyes and steady hands, started my IV and made jokes that weren't particularly funny, but helped ease my nerves anyway. "You're going to do great," he told me as they prepared to wheel my gurney into the operating room. "Dr. Chen is the best neurosurgeon in Phoenix, and we've got an excellent team taking care of you today." As the anesthesia took hold, my last conscious thought was about my biological family. Were they thinking about me today? Did they remember that this was the day their middle daughter would have brain surgery? Or had they already moved on, restructured their lives around the absence of medical bills and complicated medical schedules? It didn't matter, I realized, as consciousness faded. Today, I had David and Maria Rodriguez sitting in a waiting room, ready to be the first faces I saw when I woke up. Today, I had people who had chosen to care about me rather than people who felt obligated to do so. That was enough. That was more than enough. When I woke up 6 hours later, groggy and disoriented, Maria was holding my hand and David was standing at the foot of my bed with a smile that reached his eyes. "How do you feel?" Maria asked softly. I took inventory of my body, surprised to discover that the constant pressure in my head was gone. The migraine that had been my companion for months was nowhere to be found. "Different," I said, my voice hoarse from the breathing tube. "Better." Dr. Chen appeared at my bedside, her surgical scrubs replaced by a white coat, her expression satisfied. Everything went perfectly. The tumor was exactly where we expected it to be, and we were able to remove it completely. "Your brain looks healthy, and I expect a full recovery." "When can I go home?" I asked, the word home feeling natural for the first time since this ordeal began. "Tomorrow, if everything continues to look good tonight," she replied. "Then a few weeks of taking it easy while your brain heals." That night, lying in my Riverside hospital bed with Maria sleeping in the chair beside me and David stretched out on the uncomfortable couch, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Complete peace. Not just the absence of physical pain, but the absence of worry about whether I was wanted, whether I was worth the trouble, whether my needs were too expensive for the people who were supposed to love me. The Rodriguez family had chosen me, tumor and all. They had rearranged their lives to accommodate my medical needs without making me feel like a burden. They had shown me what family could look like when it was based on choice rather than obligation. As I drifted off to sleep, I made a promise to myself and to them. I would not waste this second chance. I would not take their generosity for granted. I would use this opportunity to become someone worthy of their faith in me. I would show everyone, including the family who had given up on me, what I was truly capable of when I had people who believed in me. The foundation was laid. Now it was time to start building. Recovery was slower than I expected, but faster than I feared. The first week after surgery was a haze of prescribed rest, gentle walks around the Rodriguez's backyard, and the strange sensation of living without constant pain for the first time in months. My head felt lighter, not just physically but mentally, as if removing the tumor had also removed a fog I hadn't realized was clouding my thoughts. Maria had arranged her nursing schedule to be home during my initial recovery, and I quickly learned that her approach to caregiving was both professional and deeply personal. She monitored my incision site with clinical precision, while also making sure I had my favorite snacks within reach, and that the television was tuned to shows that would keep me entertained without overstimulating my healing brain. David proved to be unexpectedly gifted at keeping a recovering teenager occupied. Every evening after work, he would sit beside my bed and tell me stories about the cars he was fixing, complete with detailed explanations of engine problems and mechanical solutions that somehow became fascinating when filtered through his enthusiasm. He had a way of making ordinary work sound like solving complex puzzles, and I found myself genuinely interested in the logic of automotive repair. "You've got a good mind for systems thinking," he told me one evening as I correctly predicted what might be wrong with a customer's transmission based on the symptoms he'd described. "You understand how individual problems connect to larger issues. That's a valuable skill." It was the first time anyone had identified a specific intellectual strength in me, and the observation stuck. I started paying attention to the ways different problems interconnected, how one small malfunction could cascade into larger system failures. It was a perspective that would prove useful in ways I couldn't yet imagine. By the second week, I was cleared for light academic work, and Maria helped me establish a homeschooling routine that would allow me to stay current with my Lincoln High School coursework. Ms. Williams had worked with the other teachers to create modified assignments that wouldn't strain my recovering brain but would keep me intellectually engaged. The English work came easily. Reading had always been my escape, and now it became my primary entertainment during long hours of recovery. Ms. Williams had sent a box of novels she thought I'd enjoy, along with writing prompts that encouraged me to reflect on my experiences. I started with simple journaling but gradually found myself crafting longer pieces, exploring themes of displacement, resilience, and the complicated nature of family bonds. Math proved more challenging in the immediate aftermath of surgery. Numbers that had once made perfect sense now seemed to swim on the page, and I worried that the operation had somehow damaged my ability to process mathematical concepts. Dr. Chen assured me this was temporary, a common side effect as my brain rewired itself around the surgical site, but it was still frustrating to struggle with algebra problems that should have been routine. Science, surprisingly, became my new passion. Maria had suggested I might enjoy learning about the medical procedures I'd undergone, and what started as curiosity about my own treatment expanded into a broader fascination with biological systems. I devoured books about neurology, anatomy, and surgical techniques, amazed by the complexity of the human body and the precision required to repair it when things went wrong. "You're reading at a college level," Maria observed one afternoon, finding me absorbed in a textbook about brain anatomy she'd borrowed from her nursing program. "Have you ever thought about pursuing medicine?" The question caught me off guard. In my birth family, career aspirations had been limited to immediate financial necessities. The idea of college, much less medical school, had never been presented as a realistic possibility. But here was Maria, a woman who'd seen dozens of foster children pass through her home, suggesting that I had the intellectual capacity for one of the most demanding educational paths available. "I don't know if I could afford medical school," I said, the practical concerns immediately surfacing. There are scholarships, David said from the doorway, where he'd been listening to our conversation. Programs specifically designed to help kids from situations like yours. If you've got the grades and the determination, there are ways to make it work. That night, I lay in bed thinking about the possibility of becoming a doctor. Not just the financial aspects, though those were significant, but the idea that I could spend my life helping people in medical crises, that I could be the person who delivered good news to families rather than the person receiving devastating diagnoses. It was the first time since my family's abandonment that I'd allowed myself to dream about a future that extended beyond simple survival. The tumor removal had given me back my health, but the Rodriguez family was giving me something equally valuable: permission to imagine a life of purpose and achievement. As my physical recovery progressed, I became more aware of the dynamics in my new household. David and Maria had a partnership that was both practical and affectionate, built on shared responsibilities and genuine respect for each other's strengths. They disagreed sometimes, but their conflicts were resolved through discussion rather than silence or explosion. They supported each other's individual interests while maintaining shared goals for their family and foster children. It was a revelation to witness a functional adult relationship. My parents' marriage had been characterized by financial stress, unspoken resentments, and an underlying current of disappointment that neither of them seemed able to address directly. Watching David and Maria navigate daily life together showed me that marriage could be a source of strength rather than constant tension. 3 weeks after surgery, I was cleared to return to school part-time. The prospect of walking back into Lincoln High School filled me with anxiety that had nothing to do with my medical recovery. How do you explain to classmates that your family abandoned you at a hospital? How do you answer questions about where you've been without revealing the full extent of your circumstances? Ms. Williams had prepared the ground carefully. She'd informed my teachers about my medical leave without sharing details about my family situation, and she'd arranged for Tyler Johnson, a student in my grade known for his kindness and discretion, to help me catch up on missed assignments and navigate any social awkwardness that might arise. Tyler turned out to be exactly the kind of friend I needed during this transition. He was genuinely interested in my recovery without being invasive about my personal circumstances. He helped me understand changes to class schedules and assignment deadlines without making me feel like I was behind or different. Most importantly, he treated my return to school as a normal event rather than a dramatic comeback. "How's your head feeling?" he asked on my first day back, walking with me between classes in a way that discouraged other students from approaching with more intrusive questions. "Better?" I said, surprised to realize how true that was. "Clearer than it's been in a long time." "Good. Mr. Peterson's been making chemistry way more complicated than it needs to be while you were gone, so you'll probably need help catching up on the molecular structures unit." Chemistry had never been my strongest subject, but Tyler had a gift for explaining complex concepts in ways that made them accessible. As we worked through practice problems together during lunch, I found myself understanding not just the immediate assignments, but the underlying principles that connected different chemical processes. "You're picking this up really fast," Tyler observed, after I successfully balanced a series of equations that had been giving me trouble. "Are you thinking about taking advanced chemistry next year?" Advanced placement courses had never been on my radar. In my birth family, the expectation was that I'd graduate from high school and find immediate employment to contribute to household finances. The idea of challenging myself academically for its own sake, or to improve my college prospects, hadn't been encouraged. But now, with David and Maria's support and Tyler's encouragement, I began to see academic achievement as a possibility rather than a luxury. Ms. Williams had already mentioned that my writing showed college-level analytical skills. Maria thought I had the intellectual capacity for medical school. Now Tyler was suggesting I could handle advanced coursework in science. A picture was beginning to emerge of capabilities I hadn't recognized in myself. Not because they hadn't existed before, but because they'd never been nurtured or acknowledged by the people around me. The Rodriguez family was providing more than medical care and emotional support. They were offering an environment where my intellectual potential could develop without apology or constraint. As spring progressed, I settled into routines that felt sustainable and purposeful. School in the morning, homework and reading in the afternoon, family dinners where my opinions were sought and valued. Evenings spent on personal projects that ranged from creative writing to research about college programs that interested me. I also began volunteer work at St. Mary's Medical Center, initially just a few hours a week, helping with patient transport and basic administrative tasks. The volunteer coordinator, a woman named Mrs. Sandra Davis, had been impressed by my maturity and my personal familiarity with the patient experience. "You have an unusual ability to connect with people who are scared and overwhelmed," she told me after observing me help an elderly man navigate the check-in process for outpatient surgery. "You remember what it feels like to be vulnerable in a medical setting, and you use that empathy to help others feel less alone." The volunteer work was rewarding in ways I hadn't anticipated. Helping other patients and families gave me a sense of purpose that extended beyond my own recovery and academic pursuits. It also reinforced my growing interest in healthcare as a career path, showing me the human side of medical treatment that complemented the scientific knowledge I was acquiring through my reading. Dr. Chen, who I still saw for regular follow-up appointments, noticed the changes in my demeanor and outlook. "You seem different," she observed during a 3-month post-surgery checkup. "More confident, more settled." "I feel different," I admitted. "Like I'm becoming who I'm supposed to be instead of just surviving day to day." "The Rodriguez family is good for you." "They are. But I think the surgery was good for me too, in ways that go beyond removing the tumor. Going through something that scary and coming out okay on the other side, it changes how you think about what you can handle." Dr. Chen nodded thoughtfully. "Medical trauma can be transformative in positive ways when people have adequate support systems. You're fortunate to have found a family that understands both your medical needs and your potential." That evening, I sat at my desk writing in the journal Maria had given me, reflecting on the conversation with Dr. Chen. 6 months ago, I had been a sick child in a struggling family, my future constrained by financial limitations and low expectations. Now I was a healthy teenager in a supportive home, my horizons expanding daily as I discovered capabilities I hadn't known I possessed. The transformation wasn't complete. I still had moments of sadness about my birth family's abandonment, still wondered whether Jake had graduated and joined the military as planned, whether Sophia was doing well in school, whether my parents ever thought about the daughter they'd left at the hospital. But those moments of grief were balanced by excitement about my future and gratitude for the opportunities I was being given. I was beginning to understand that abandonment could be a gift, even when it didn't feel like one at the time. My family's inability to care for me had placed me in a situation where I could thrive rather than merely survive. Their limitations had freed me from limitations I might otherwise have accepted as permanent. As I closed my journal that night, I made a decision that would shape everything that followed. I would not just succeed despite my abandonment. I would succeed because of it. Every achievement, every milestone, every moment of triumph would be built on the foundation of self-reliance and determination that had been forged in that hospital room when my family walked away. I didn't know yet what form that success would take, but I knew it would be significant enough to make my family notice. Significant enough to make them wonder what their abandoned daughter had become in their absence. The foundation was solid. Now it was time to start building something remarkable on top of it. The scholarship letter arrived on a Tuesday in April, delivered to the Rodriguez house in a thick envelope from Arizona State University. I held it in my hands for several minutes before opening it, afraid that my hopes had grown larger than reality could support. Maria found me sitting on the front porch steps, the unopened envelope balanced on my knees. "Good news or bad news?" she asked, settling beside me with the easy familiarity of someone who had watched many foster children navigate life-changing moments. "I don't know yet. I'm scared to find out. Want me to open it for you?" I shook my head, took a deep breath, and carefully tore along the envelope's edge. Inside was a formal letter on university letterhead, along with several additional documents that I couldn't process immediately because the first line of the letter made everything else blur together. "We are pleased to inform you that you have been selected as a recipient of the Phoenix Rising Scholarship, a full academic scholarship specifically designed for students who have overcome significant personal challenges." "Maria," I whispered, my voice catching on her name. "What does it say?" "Full scholarship, 4 years, Arizona State University, pre-med track." Maria's face broke into a smile that reached her eyes and seemed to light up the entire porch. Erika, that's incredible. Do you know how competitive that scholarship is? They only give out 3 per year statewide. I read the letter again, more slowly this time, absorbing details about academic requirements, mentorship programs, and internship opportunities. The scholarship wasn't just financial support. It was a comprehensive program designed to help students from disadvantaged backgrounds succeed in demanding academic fields like medicine. There's an orientation program this summer, I said, scanning the additional documents. 6 weeks on campus, taking college-level courses for credit, working with current medical students as mentors. It says here that scholarship recipients have a 97% acceptance rate into medical school programs. David appeared in the doorway, drawn by our excited voices. When Maria explained about the scholarship, his reaction was characteristically practical, but deeply supportive. "This changes everything," he said, sitting on the porch railing to face us. "We'll need to start planning for your transition to university life, figure out what you'll need for the summer program, talk about how you want to handle contact with your birth family now that your circumstances have changed so dramatically." The mention of my birth family sent a jolt through my excitement. I hadn't spoken to any of them since the day my mother left me at the hospital, hadn't even known if they were aware of my successful surgery and recovery. The scholarship represented not just personal achievement but validation that their decision to abandon me had been catastrophically wrong. "Do you think they know?" I asked quietly. "About the surgery, about my living here, about any of this?" Maria considered the question carefully. "Ms. Rodriguez, your caseworker, was required to send updates to your parents about your medical treatment and general welfare. Whether they read those reports or responded to them is another matter entirely. What if I don't want them to know about the scholarship?" "That's entirely your choice," David said firmly. "You're 17 years old, and you'll be 18 before you start university. You have no legal obligation to maintain contact with people who chose not to maintain contact with you." But even as I nodded agreement, I knew that complete separation wasn't what I wanted. I didn't want reconciliation, exactly, but I wanted acknowledgement. I wanted them to understand the magnitude of what they had given up when they walked away from my hospital bed. I wanted them to see who I had become in their absence. The summer program at Arizona State University was unlike anything I had experienced in my previous educational journey. Living in a dormitory with other scholarship recipients, taking actual university courses for credit, working alongside students who were already pursuing medical degrees, I felt like I was inhabiting a version of myself I hadn't known existed. My roommate was a girl named Jessica Martinez from Tucson, whose path to the scholarship had involved overcoming poverty and family dysfunction that made my own circumstances seem almost privileged. She was brilliant, focused, and possessed of a dry sense of humor that helped us both navigate the intensity of the program. "You know what's weird about this place?" Jessica said one evening as we studied organic chemistry in our dorm room. "Everyone here actually wants to learn stuff. Like, they're not just going through the motions because they have to be in school." She was right. The other scholarship recipients were driven by genuine intellectual curiosity and career ambitions that extended far beyond immediate financial necessity. They asked questions because they wanted to understand complex concepts, not because they were trying to guess what would be on the next test. They collaborated on projects because they enjoyed the process of problem solving, not because they were required to work in groups. Being surrounded by this level of academic motivation was initially intimidating, but gradually it became inspiring. I found myself pushing harder, thinking more deeply, and engaging with course material in ways that revealed connections I hadn't previously recognized. The neurobiology course in particular fascinated me because it connected directly to my own medical experiences while opening up entirely new areas of scientific understanding. Professor Dr. Amanda Ross, who taught the neurobiology course, noticed my particular interest in the subject matter and invited me to attend a research meeting in her laboratory. Watching graduate students present their findings about brain trauma and recovery, I experienced something like recognition, as if I was seeing my own story. brain trauma and recovery, I experienced something like recognition, as if I was seeing my own story translated into scientific language. Your background gives you a unique perspective on this research, Dr. Ross told me after the meeting. You understand the patient experience in ways that most researchers don't. That combination of personal insight and academic rigor could be very valuable in this field. Are you saying I could do research like this? I'm saying you could do research like this if you choose to pursue it. Medical school is one path, but research is another. You could also combine both approaches, becoming a physician scientist who bridges clinical practice and laboratory investigation. The possibility had never occurred to me. I had been thinking about medicine in terms of direct patient care, following the model of Dr. Chen and the other healthcare providers who had helped me through my own medical crisis. But research represented a different way of contributing to medical knowledge, one that appealed to the analytical skills that David had recognized in me months earlier. That night, I called Maria and David to tell them about the research opportunity and Dr. Ross's suggestion about physician-scientist careers. Their response was enthusiastic but not surprised, as if they had always expected me to exceed conventional expectations. "You've got the mind for it," David said, his voice warm with pride over the phone. "You see patterns that other people miss, and you're not satisfied with surface explanations. Those are exactly the qualities that make good researchers. Plus," Maria added, "you've experienced the medical system from the patient side. You understand what it's like to be vulnerable and scared and dependent on other people's expertise. That perspective would make you a better researcher and a better doctor." As the summer program progressed, I began to envision a future that was both more ambitious and more specific than anything I had previously imagined. I would complete my undergraduate degree with a focus on neuroscience and research methodology. I would apply to combined MD-PhD programs that would allow me to pursue both medical training and research specialization. I would eventually establish my own laboratory investigating brain trauma and recovery, contributing to medical knowledge while also maintaining a clinical practice that served patients facing circumstances similar to my own. It was an audacious plan for someone who had been abandoned by her family less than 2 years earlier, but the summer program had shown me that audacious plans were not only possible but expected among the kind of people I was now surrounded by. Excellence wasn't just encouraged, it was assumed. The final project for the summer program required scholarship recipients to present research proposals for projects they might pursue during their undergraduate careers. I chose to design a study investigating the psychological and neurological factors that contributed to resilience in adolescents facing medical trauma. The proposal combined my personal experience with the scientific methodology I had learned during the program, creating a bridge between my past and my future career aspirations. The presentation went better than I had hoped. Dr. Ross and the other faculty members asked challenging questions that pushed me to think more deeply about research design and ethical considerations. But they also expressed a genuine interest in the project's potential contributions to medical understanding. "This is graduate-level thinking," Dr. Ross said during the feedback session. "You're already approaching research questions with the kind of sophistication we usually see from students who are well into their PhD programs." After the presentation, I called Tyler Johnson, who had become one of my closest friends during senior year at Lincoln High School. He had been accepted to Arizona State University's engineering program and would be starting as a freshman when I returned for my sophomore year, having earned a full year of college credit through the summer program. "So you're basically going to be a year ahead of me even though we graduated together?" he asked, his tone mixing admiration with mock indignation. "Looks that way. But we'll still be on the same campus, and I can help you navigate the academic support services and research opportunities." "Listen to you, talking like you already own the place." He was joking, but there was truth in the observation. The summer program had given me confidence that extended beyond academic achievement. I had learned to navigate university systems, to seek out mentorship opportunities, to advocate for my educational needs, and to envision myself as someone who belonged in environments that had once seemed impossibly elite. When I returned to the Rodriguez house at the end of the summer, I brought with me not just college credits and research experience, but a fundamental shift in how I understood my own potential. The abandoned girl who had been left at St. Mary's Medical Center was still part of my story, but she was no longer the defining chapter. Maria noticed the change immediately. "You carry yourself differently," she observed as we unpacked my things from the summer program. "More like someone who knows exactly where she's going." "I do know where I'm going," I replied, surprised by the certainty in my own voice. "And I know how I'm going to get there." That autumn, as I began my official freshman year at Arizona State University while living at home with David and Maria, I established routines that balanced academic excellence with practical preparation for long-term success. I maintained a perfect GPA while working part-time in Dr. Ross's research laboratory. I volunteered at St. Mary's Medical Center, now in a more advanced capacity that involved helping with patient education and family support. I began building relationships with professors and graduate students who could serve as mentors and references for future opportunities. I also started something I called my Success Fund, setting aside every dollar I could from my part-time work and scholarship stipends. The money wasn't for immediate needs, which were covered by my scholarship and the Rodriguez family's support, but for future opportunities that might require financial investment. Business ventures, perhaps, or seed money for medical research projects, or simply the security of knowing I would never again be vulnerable to abandonment because of financial constraints. The idea of entrepreneurial success had been planted during the summer program, where several guest speakers had talked about the intersection of medical innovation and business development. Dr. Patricia Williams, my former English teacher who had stayed in touch throughout my journey, had sent me articles about young entrepreneurs who had built successful companies while still in college. The stories fascinated me because they showed how academic achievement could be translated into financial independence and professional influence. "You're thinking about more than just becoming a doctor, aren't you?" David observed one evening as he found me reading business journals alongside my neuroscience textbooks. "I'm thinking about becoming someone who can't be abandoned," I admitted. "Someone who has enough success and independence that what happened to me could never happen to anyone else in my family, or to other kids who find themselves in similar situations. That's ambitious. It's necessary." During winter break of my freshman year, I made a decision that surprised even myself. I used my accumulated savings to hire a private investigator to locate my birth family and provide me with current information about their circumstances. I told myself it was simply curiosity, but I knew it was something deeper. I needed to understand what had become of the people who had chosen to exclude me from their lives. The investigator's report arrived 3 weeks later. My parents were still living in Riverside Heights, but barely. Dad's back injury had never fully healed, limiting his ability to work construction, and Mom's part-time job at the grocery store was insufficient to support the family. Jake had indeed joined the military and was stationed in North Carolina, sending money home when he could. Sophia was now a sophomore in high school, working after school to help with family expenses. They had struggled financially every year since my abandonment, the investigator reported. Dad had filed for disability benefits that were repeatedly denied. They had fallen behind on mortgage payments multiple times, saved from foreclosure only by temporary assistance from church organizations and emergency family loan programs. They had never attempted to contact me or inquire about my welfare through official channels. Reading the report, I felt a complex mixture of emotions that I couldn't easily categorize. Sadness for their ongoing struggles, anger at their continued refusal to acknowledge my existence, and something that might have been vindication at the evidence that abandoning me hadn't solved their financial problems as they had hoped. But predominantly, I felt determination. Their struggles were not my responsibility to solve, but my success would be my statement about the choices they had made. Every achievement, every milestone, every moment of triumph would serve as evidence of what they had lost when they walked away from my hospital bed. As sophomore year began, I doubled down on both academic excellence and extracurricular activities that would build toward long-term success. I joined the Pre-Medical Honor Society, started a student organization focused on healthcare advocacy for disadvantaged populations, and began working on my first independent research project under Dr. Ross's supervision. The research project investigated neuroplasticity in adolescents who had experienced medical trauma, using brain imaging technology to track how therapeutic interventions affected neural recovery patterns. It was exactly the kind of work that combined my personal experience with scientific methodology, and it was generating results that surprised even Dr. Ross with their implications for treatment protocols. "You're onto something significant here," she told me during one of our weekly research meetings. "This could be publishable in a major medical journal, which would be extraordinary for an undergraduate researcher." What would that mean for my future applications? It would mean that medical schools and PhD programs would compete for you rather than the other way around. Published research as an undergraduate, especially research that makes genuine contributions to medical knowledge, puts you in a very select category of applicants. That evening, I sat in my room at the Rodriguez house, looking at the data from my research project and thinking about the trajectory my life had taken since that Tuesday when my family abandoned me at the hospital. The sick child who had been deemed too expensive to keep had become a university researcher whose work might influence medical treatment for thousands of patients. The transformation wasn't complete yet, but its direction was unmistakable. I was building something substantial, something that would endure, something that would serve as permanent testimony to the potential my birth family had failed to recognize. In 2 years, I would graduate from Arizona State University with a degree in neuroscience and published research experience. I would be accepted to multiple MD-PhD programs at prestigious institutions. I would eventually establish myself as both a practicing physician and a successful medical researcher. And along the way, I would also pursue the business ventures that would provide the financial independence to ensure I could never again be abandoned for economic reasons. My birth family had no idea what their discarded daughter was becoming in their absence. But they would find out, and when they did, the magnitude of their loss would be impossible to ignore. The acceptance letter from Stanford's MD-PhD program arrived on the same day I received news that would change everything. I was sitting in Dr. Ross's laboratory, analyzing data from my latest research project on neural recovery patterns, when my phone buzzed with a call from Jennifer Davis, the patent attorney I'd been working with for the past 6 months. "Erika, we need to talk," Jennifer said, her voice carrying an excitement I'd never heard before. "The provisional patent application for your neural stimulation device has been fast-tracked, and I've got 3 major medical device companies interested in licensing discussions." I set down my pipette carefully, my hands suddenly unsteady. The device Jennifer was referring to had started as a side project, an idea that emerged from my research into brain trauma recovery. Working with Tyler Johnson, who had become an exceptional engineering student, we had developed a non-invasive neural stimulation system that could accelerate healing in patients recovering from brain surgery. What had begun as a theoretical concept had evolved into a working prototype that was showing remarkable results in preliminary testing. "How interested?" I asked, stepping away from my lab bench to take the call privately. "Interested enough that the initial offers are starting at $2.5 million for a 5-year licensing agreement, with royalty percentages that could generate substantial ongoing income. And that's just the opening position. $2.5 million. The number was so far beyond anything I had imagined that it felt abstract, like a figure from someone else's life. Just 4 years earlier, I had been a 14-year-old girl whose family couldn't afford basic medical care. Now at 21, I was potentially looking at financial independence that would dwarf anything my birth family had ever dreamed of achieving. "When do they want to meet?" I asked, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. "Next week. I've scheduled preliminary discussions with all 3 companies. MedTech Innovations on Tuesday, Neural Dynamics on Wednesday, and BioAdvanced Systems on Thursday. You'll need to be prepared to discuss technical specifications, demonstrate the device, and negotiate preliminary terms." After I hung up, I sat in the empty laboratory for several minutes, absorbing the magnitude of what was happening. The research project that had started as a way to process my own medical trauma was becoming something that could transform not just my life, but the lives of thousands of patients facing similar challenges. Dr. Ross found me there an hour later, still sitting among the research equipment that had become as familiar as the Rodriguez family's kitchen. "You look like someone who just received life-changing news," she observed, settling into the chair across from my workstation. I told her about Jennifer's call, about the patent approval, about the licensing offers that could make me financially independent before I even finished my undergraduate degree. "This is extraordinary, Erika," but not entirely surprising. The device addresses a real medical need, and your research has demonstrated its effectiveness in ways that would be difficult for established companies to replicate. You've created something genuinely innovative. I keep thinking about my family, I admitted, about how they left me at the hospital because they couldn't afford medical bills. And now I'm about to make millions of dollars from medical technology that grew out of that experience. Dr. Ross nodded thoughtfully. Success often has that kind of ironic symmetry. The experiences that nearly destroy us become the foundation for everything we build afterward. That evening, I called David and Maria to share the news. Their reaction was characteristically supportive but practical, focused on helping me make decisions that would serve my long-term interests rather than just celebrating the immediate financial windfall. "This is wonderful, Erika, but it's also complicated," Maria said during our kitchen table conversation that had become our family's informal decision-making forum. "You'll need legal representation, financial planning, and strategies for managing sudden wealth that don't derail your academic and career goals." David was already thinking about practical implications. The licensing income could fund your medical school education without debt, give you financial independence to pursue research that interests you, rather than research that pays bills, and provide security that ensures you never face the kind of financial vulnerability your birth family experienced. It could also fund other projects, I said, an idea that had been forming since Jennifer's call. Medical research initiatives, scholarship programs for kids in situations like mine, maybe even a foundation that provides emergency financial assistance to families facing medical crises. The following week, I found myself in conference rooms with executives from 3 major medical device companies, discussing technical specifications and financial projections, with the same confidence I had once reserved for conversations about neurobiology research. Tyler accompanied me to the meetings, his engineering expertise complementing my medical knowledge as we fielded questions about manufacturing scalability and regulatory approval timelines. The negotiations were intense but exhilarating. Each company recognized the device's potential market value, but they also understood that they were dealing with inventors who had options and weren't desperate to accept the first offer presented. MedTech Innovations proposed a $3 million licensing fee with 8% royalties on net sales. Neural Dynamics countered with $2.8 million upfront and 10% royalties. BioAdvanced Systems offered the most comprehensive package, $4 million for exclusive licensing rights, 12% royalties, and a consulting agreement that would pay me an additional $50,000 per year to advise on product development and marketing strategies. "The BioAdvanced offer is exceptional," Jennifer explained as we reviewed the proposals. "The consulting component means you'll maintain involvement in how the device is developed and marketed, which protects both your intellectual property rights and your professional reputation." I chose BioAdvanced Systems, not just for the financial terms, but because their executives demonstrated genuine understanding of the device's medical applications and commitment to making it accessible to hospitals that serve disadvantaged populations. The contract included provisions requiring the company to offer reduced pricing to safety net hospitals and community health centers, ensuring that patients who couldn't afford premium medical care would still benefit from the technology. The signing ceremony took place on a Thursday afternoon in downtown Phoenix, in a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city where I had been abandoned and where I had discovered my potential. As I signed the documents that made me a multimillionaire, I thought about the 14-year-old girl who had lain in a hospital bed at St. Mary's Medical Center, wondering if she would ever see her family again. That girl could never have imagined this moment, but she had survived the experience that made it possible. Within weeks of signing the licensing agreement, I established the Martinez Medical Foundation, named in honor of David and Maria Rodriguez, and their commitment to supporting children who had been failed by other systems. The foundation's mission was to provide emergency financial assistance to families facing medical crises, preventing the kind of abandonment I had experienced by ensuring that medical care remained accessible regardless of economic circumstances. The foundation's first grant recipient was a family in Tucson whose 8-year-old daughter needed heart surgery that their insurance wouldn't fully cover. The parents had been considering surrendering custody to ensure their daughter received treatment, exactly the situation my birth family had faced 4 years earlier. "You've prevented a tragedy," the mother told me during a phone call after the foundation covered their remaining medical costs. "We were going to lose our daughter one way or another, and you made sure we could keep our family together." Stories like that validated everything I had worked toward since my abandonment. The Martinez Medical Foundation wasn't just about helping individual families. It was about systematically addressing the financial barriers that forced parents to choose between their children's health and their family's survival. As my senior year at Arizona State University began, I was simultaneously managing a multi-million-dollar business relationship, running a charitable foundation, maintaining perfect grades in advanced neuroscience courses, and preparing applications for medical school programs that no longer seemed like distant dreams, but like logical next steps in a carefully planned career trajectory. The workload was intense, but I had learned to thrive under pressure that would have overwhelmed the person I had been before my family's abandonment. Every challenge was an opportunity to prove my resilience. Every success was evidence of capabilities that my birth family had failed to recognize. Tyler, who had become both my closest friend and my primary business partner, often marveled at how much I had accomplished in such a short time. "You realize you've basically built a medical technology empire while most people our age are just figuring out what they want to major in," he said one evening, as we reviewed quarterly royalty reports that showed the neural stimulation device was exceeding all sales projections. "I realize I've built something my family can't ignore," I replied, the truth slipping out before I could soften it. Tyler understood the complexity of my relationship with success. He had watched me work with an intensity that went beyond normal academic ambition, had seen how every achievement seemed to carry emotional weight that had nothing to do with professional satisfaction. "Are you going to contact them?" he asked. "Now that you've got the kind of success that proves their decision was wrong?" The question had been haunting me for months. The private investigator I had hired provided regular updates on my birth family's circumstances, and the reports painted a picture of ongoing struggle that stood in stark contrast to my expanding success. Dad's disability claims had finally been approved, but the benefits barely covered basic living expenses. Mom had been laid off from the grocery store when the company downsized. Jake was still sending money from his military salary, but it wasn't enough to prevent the slow slide toward financial disaster that seemed inevitable. Sophia was now a senior in high school, working part-time at a fast food restaurant to help pay for basic necessities. Her grades were good enough for college, but the family couldn't afford tuition or application fees. She was facing the same limited options that had once constrained my own future, before abandonment had inadvertently freed me to pursue possibilities I wouldn't have otherwise considered. "I'm not going to contact them," I told Tyler, "but I think they're going to contact me." My prediction proved accurate sooner than I had expected. 3 weeks later, David answered the phone at the Rodriguez house and found himself speaking to my brother Jake, who had somehow tracked down my current living situation and wanted to arrange a meeting. "He says it's urgent," David told me when I came home from the university. "Family emergency. He needs to speak with you as soon as possible." I knew what Jake wanted before I called him back. The private investigator's most recent report had mentioned that my parents were facing foreclosure proceedings on the family home, with a court date scheduled for the following month. They had exhausted their options for assistance and were looking at the possibility of losing the house where Jake and Sophia had grown up. "Erika," Jake said when he answered my call, his voice carrying a mixture of relief and desperation. "Thank God you're willing to talk to me." "What do you want, Jake?" "I want to see you. I want to explain what happened when you were in the hospital, and I want to ask for your help with something." "Help with what?" "Mom and Dad are about to lose the house. They're facing bankruptcy, and I don't have enough money to save them. But I heard about your success, about the medical device and the licensing deals. You thought maybe the daughter they abandoned might be willing to bail them out of their financial problems?" "Erika, it wasn't like that. They didn't abandon you. They were trying to make sure you got the medical care you needed by leaving me at a hospital with a note saying they couldn't afford me anymore." The silence that followed stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had been disconnected. "I know how it looked," Jake finally said. "I know how it felt. But they were desperate. And they thought they were doing what was best for everyone. What they were doing was giving up on their child because she was inconvenient and expensive. And now that child has become successful enough to help her family when they need it most." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with Jake alternating between apologies for the past and requests for assistance with the present. He wanted me to meet with our parents, to hear their explanation for what had happened, to consider providing financial help that would prevent them from losing their home. I agreed to meet with them, but not for the reasons Jake hoped. I agreed because I wanted them to see who I had become in their absence, to understand the magnitude of what they had lost when they walked away from my hospital bed. The meeting was scheduled for the following Saturday, at a coffee shop in downtown Phoenix, that was convenient to both the Rodriguez house and my parents' current address. I chose the location deliberately, a place where I would feel comfortable and confident rather than vulnerable to emotional manipulation. I also chose my outfit carefully. A tailored business suit that conveyed professional success, jewelry that suggested financial prosperity, and the kind of understated elegance that money could buy but poverty couldn't fake. I wanted to look like someone who belonged in corporate boardrooms and medical conferences, someone whose value couldn't be measured by the cost of her healthcare. When I walked into the coffee shop that Saturday morning, I saw my birth family gathered around a corner table, their clothes showing the wear of financial strain, and their faces showing the stress of years spent struggling with problems that had only gotten worse since my departure. My father looked older than his years, his hair completely gray now, and his shoulders carrying the weight of chronic pain and repeated disappointment. My mother had the tired appearance of someone who had worked too many minimum-wage jobs and worried about too many unpaid bills. Sophia, now 17 and poised on the edge of adulthood, looked like a younger version of myself, but one who had been shaped by financial insecurity rather than medical trauma. Jake stood when he saw me approaching, his military bearing evident in his posture but his face showing the uncertainty of someone who wasn't sure how this reunion would unfold. "Erika," my mother said, her voice breaking slightly on my name. "You look wonderful." I took the empty chair across from them, noting how the table positioned me facing my birth family like a job interview or a business negotiation, rather than a family reunion. "Hello, Mom. Dad. Sophia." The conversation that followed was stilted and careful, with everyone trying to navigate the emotional minefield of 4 years of separation and the financial crisis that had prompted this meeting. My parents apologized for their decision to leave me at the hospital, explaining their desperation and their belief that they were acting in my best interests. They expressed pride in my academic and professional achievements, though their knowledge of my success seemed to come entirely from Jake's research rather than any attempt they had made to maintain contact. Sophia was the most honest about the family's current circumstances, describing the years of financial struggle, the constant anxiety about money, and the limited options available to her as she prepared to graduate from high school. "I know we don't have the right to ask for anything," my father finally said, his voice carefully controlled. "But Jake told us about your success, about the money you've made from your medical research. We're facing bankruptcy, and we're going to lose the house unless we can come up with $30,000 in the next 2 weeks. $30,000 to save the house where I grew up but was never allowed to return to," I said, my voice equally controlled. "Erika, please," my mother said. "I know you're angry, and you have every right to be. But this could be a chance for our family to come back together, to heal from what happened and move forward. You want me to save you from the financial problems that you thought abandoning me would solve. We want a chance to be a family again," Jake said. "We want to make up for the mistakes we made." I looked around the table at the faces of the people who had once been my family, seeing in their expressions a mixture of hope, desperation, and guilt that told me everything I needed to know about their motivations for this meeting. "I'll give you the $30,000, I said quietly, watching relief flood their faces. "But not as a gift, and not as the beginning of a reconciliation." "What do you mean?" Sophia asked, confusion replacing the gratitude in her expression. "I mean, I'll pay off your debt as a business transaction. I'll buy the house from the bank, and you can continue living there as my tenants. The rent will be reasonable, well below market rate, but it will be a landlord-tenant relationship, not a family relationship." The silence that followed was heavy with implications they were only beginning to understand. "I'll also establish a college fund for Sophia, since she's the only one in this family who wasn't complicit in abandoning a child for financial convenience. But my relationship with this family ended when you left me at St. Mary's Medical Center with a note saying you couldn't afford me. This meeting is a business transaction, not a reunion. I stood to leave, placing a business card on the table with Jennifer Davis's contact information. Have your lawyer contact mine to work out the details of the property transfer and rental agreement. And Jake, the next time you want something from the daughter your family abandoned, don't pretend it's about love or reconciliation. Just ask for what you want and be honest about why you want it. As I walked away from that table, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not satisfaction or revenge, but a kind of closure that had nothing to do with my birth family's financial problems and everything to do with my own understanding of who I had become. The abandoned girl who had lain in a hospital bed 4 years earlier was gone. In her place was a woman who could write checks that solved other people's problems, but who would never again be vulnerable to abandonment or rejection. My family's bankruptcy hearing was scheduled for the following Tuesday. They wouldn't need it now, thanks to my intervention, but I had already made arrangements to attend as a spectator. Not to gloat over their financial distress, but to witness the official end of a chapter in my life that had begun with medical abandonment and concluded with financial rescue. I would arrive at that courthouse in a vehicle that symbolized everything I had achieved in their absence, a private jet that would land at the small airfield adjacent to the Maricopa County complex, carrying a woman who had transformed abandonment into achievement and trauma into triumph. They would see that jet land, and they would know that the daughter they had discarded had become someone they could never have imagined, someone who had succeeded beyond their wildest dreams, while they had failed in ways they had never anticipated. The final confrontation was approaching, and I was ready. The Gulfstream G650 touched down at Phoenix Sky Harbor's private aviation terminal at precisely 10:30 on Tuesday morning, exactly 30 minutes before my birth. Family's bankruptcy hearing was scheduled to begin at the Maricopa County Courthouse. I had timed the arrival deliberately, ensuring that the sleek white aircraft with Martinez Medical Foundation emblazoned in blue letters across its fuselage would be visible from the courthouse parking lot, where my family would be arriving for their appointment with financial ruin they no longer needed to face. Tyler sat across from me in the luxurious cabin, reviewing the final paperwork for our latest business venture, while I watched Phoenix sprawl beneath us through the oversized windows. The city looked different from this altitude. The neighborhood where I had grown up now just one small section in a vast urban landscape that stretched to the mountains in every direction. "You know they're going to see this, right?" Tyler said, gesturing toward the opulent interior of the aircraft that had cost more than most people's houses. "The jet, the timing, all of it. They'll understand exactly what you're communicating." "That's the point," I replied, checking my watch again. The bankruptcy hearing would be canceled, of course, since I had arranged for their debts to be satisfied through the property purchase and rental agreement Jennifer Davis had negotiated on my behalf. But they would still arrive at the courthouse, still park in that lot, still see the evidence of what their abandoned daughter had accomplished. The pilot's voice came through the cabin intercom. "Ms. Martinez, we're cleared for disembarkment. Ground transportation is waiting as requested." I gathered my briefcase and the leather portfolio containing copies of the documents that had legally transferred ownership of my childhood home from the bank to Martinez Medical Foundation Holdings, the subsidiary I had created specifically for real estate investments that served philanthropic purposes. My birth family would receive official notification of the transaction today, along with their first rental agreement and a lease that guaranteed their housing security for the next 5 years at below-market rates. The Blacktown car that met us at the private terminal was another calculated choice, understated but unmistakably expensive, the kind of vehicle that whispered rather than shouted about financial success. As we drove through downtown Phoenix toward the courthouse, I felt a strange calmness that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with completion. 4.5 years earlier, I had been a terrified teenager whose family had walked away from her hospital bed because they couldn't afford her medical care. Today, I was a 21-year-old entrepreneur whose net worth exceeded $8 million, whose medical research had been published in 3 major journals, and whose foundation had prevented dozens of families from facing the same impossible choice my parents had confronted. The transformation was complete, But it wasn't about proving anything to the people who had abandoned me. It was about proving something to myself about the kind of person I could become when circumstances forced me to rely entirely on my own capabilities and the kindness of people who chose to believe in me. At the courthouse, I positioned myself in the parking area where I could observe my family's arrival without being immediately visible to them. They came in Jake's aging Honda Civic, the car showing the wear of someone who maintained it carefully but couldn't afford frequent repairs. My parents moved slowly, Dad's chronic back pain evident in his careful gait, Mom's anxiety visible in the way she clutched her purse and checked her watch repeatedly. Sophia walked beside them with the determined posture of someone who had learned to be strong beyond her years, her high school graduation cap and gown hanging in the car's back window, as a reminder of dreams that financial reality might not allow her to pursue. They paused at the courthouse entrance when Jake's phone rang. I watched from a distance as he answered, listened, and then spoke urgently to our parents. The relief that washed over their faces told me that Jennifer Davis was delivering the news about the debt satisfaction and property transfer, explaining that the bankruptcy proceeding was no longer necessary. As they turned to leave the courthouse, walking back toward Jake's car with expressions of confusion mixed with gratitude, they saw the Gulfstream parked at the nearby aviation terminal. I watched my father point toward the aircraft, saw my mother shade her eyes to read the Martinez Medical Foundation lettering on its side, witnessed the moment when understanding dawned in all their faces simultaneously. Sophia was the first to spot me standing beside the town car, her gaze meeting mine across the parking lot with an expression that held no resentment, only a kind of wonder at the dramatic reversal our circumstances had undergone since that day when they had left their middle daughter at a hospital. For several seconds, we simply looked at each other across the distance that represented far more than physical space. Then my mother raised her hand in a small wave that might have been acknowledgement or might have been goodbye, and I nodded once in response before getting into the town car. As we drove away from the courthouse, Tyler asked the question I had been expecting. How do you feel? Now that it's over, now that they've seen what you've built, how do you feel? Free, I said, and realized it was the first completely honest answer I had given to that question in years. Free from needing their approval, free from wanting their apology, free from caring whether they understand what they lost when they walked away. The Martin Medical Foundation had grown to employ 12 full-time staff members and had dispersed over $2 million in emergency medical assistance to families across Arizona and New Mexico. My neural stimulation device was being used in hospitals throughout North America and had been approved for trials in European medical centers. Stanford Medical School had fast-tracked my admission to their MD-PhD program, where I would begin graduate studies in biomedical engineering while completing my medical training. More importantly, I had learned something about resilience that I couldn't have discovered any other way. Abandonment had taught me self-reliance. Medical trauma had shown me the power of scientific knowledge. Financial insecurity had motivated me to create sustainable wealth. The worst experience of my childhood had become the foundation for everything I valued about my adult life. 6 months later, I received a handwritten letter from Sophia, mailed to the Rodriguez house where I still kept a room despite my financial ability to live anywhere I chose. She was starting her freshman year at Arizona State University on a full scholarship I had arranged through the Martinez Medical Foundation's educational initiative. She wanted to study biomedical engineering, inspired by stories about her sister's work that she had researched online. "I know you didn't do any of this for us," she wrote. "I know you built your success despite our family, not because of it. But I want you to know that watching you transform abandonment into achievement has taught me something important about resilience and possibility. I hope someday I can build something meaningful from my own challenges, the way you built something extraordinary from yours." I kept that letter in my desk drawer at the foundation office, not as a memento of family reconciliation, but as a reminder that success ripples outward in ways we don't always anticipate, touching lives and inspiring changes that extend far beyond our original intentions. My name is Erika Martinez. When I was 14, my family left me at a hospital because they couldn't afford my medical care. 6 years later, they watched my private jet land at the courthouse, where they were scheduled to file for bankruptcy. This story isn't about revenge or proving anyone wrong. It's about what happens when abandonment becomes the foundation for everything you build, when trauma transforms into triumph, and when the people who give up on you discover that they gave up on someone extraordinary. The girl they left behind became the woman who could save them, but who chose instead to save herself and countless others who face similar challenges. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't proving others wrong about you, but proving yourself right about what you can become when you refuse to let anyone else's limitations define your possibilities. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.